Tracy Sabol tonight on EWTN News Nightly. Business of the bishops. Big questions face the USCCB as it meets this week and selects new leadership. We have analysis. Closest of margins. The Senate stays blue, but will the House turn red? We report on control of Congress from Capitol Hill. Male and female. How cultural pressures led to one man's experience with gender surgeries. And lunch with the Pope. The Holy Father's witness to charity on the World Day of the Poor. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us on this feast of St. Lawrence O'Toole. Our top story tonight, President Joe Biden meets face-to-face with the president of China at the Group of 20 summit in Indonesia. The meeting comes at a tense time between both world powers, especially concerning Taiwan. And in a news conference, President Biden was asked about abortion, and he appeared to regret answering the question. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Hi, Tracy. Well, as he continues his multi-day overseas trip across the globe, today President Joe Biden met with Chinese President Xi Jinping for some 3 hours. And the president told reporters he does not think, quote, there's any imminent attempt on the part of China to invade Taiwan.
President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping shake hands while the two attend the Group of 20 summit of large economies. And with the two men sitting across from each other, most of their staff wearing masks, President Biden told the Chinese leader there's little substitute for face-to-face discussion, adding both nations must manage their differences, avoid conflict, and work together on urgent global issues.
As you know, I'm committed to keeping the lines of communications open between you and me personally, but our governments across the board.
And through an interpreter, President Xi Jinping spoke of working towards world peace and greater confidence in global stability.
I look forward to working with you, Mr. President, to bring China-U.S. relations back to the track of healthy and stable growth to the benefit of our two countries and the world as a whole. Thank you.
Later at a news conference, President Biden told reporters regarding Taiwan,
One China policy, our One China policy has not changed. Has not changed. We oppose unilateral change in the status quo by either side, and we're committed to maintaining the peace and stability in the Taiwan Straits.
And on Ukraine,
we discussed Russia's aggression against Ukraine, reaffirmed our shared belief in the threat or the use of nuclear weapons is totally unacceptable.
The president was also asked by one reporter what Americans should expect from Congress as it relates to abortion after the midterms.
I don't think they can expect much of anything other than we're going to maintain our positions. I'm not going to get into more questions. I shouldn't even answer your question. No, I don't think that. I don't think there's enough votes to codify unless something happens unusual in the House.
Also tonight, we're told that President Biden brought up Xinjiang, Tibet, Hong Kong, and human rights more broadly, and that both world leaders reiterated their agreement that a nuclear war must never be fought and can never be won. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Well, it is official. Democrats will control the U.S. Senate for the next 2 years. That's after Nevada incumbent Senator Catherine Cortez Masto won re-election, giving Democrats 50 seats, with Vice President Kamala Harris breaking ties. But the party in control of the House is still up for grabs. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales has the latest.
It's hard to believe that we're nearly a week after Election Day and more than a dozen races are still undecided. In California and Arizona, they're still counting votes. Majority Leader Chuck Schumer will be in charge of the Senate, and he says that there are a number of reasons why Democrats came out on top.
There are three things that helped the Senate secure the majority. One, our terrific candidates. Two, our agenda and our accomplishments. And three, the American people rejected the anti-democratic, extremist MAGA Republicans.
The majority leader adds that abortion access was key to Democrat success.
Because the American people turned out to elect Democrats in the Senate, there's now a firewall against the nationwide abortion ban threat that so many Republicans have talked about.
Republican Senator Bill Cassidy says the election shows the American people want Congress to get things done.
I learned that the American people want a way forward that actually focuses on ideas that will make their lives better, not just their lives, but that for future generations.
Meanwhile, control of the House remains uncertain. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says Democrats need to be productive, even during the lame duck session of Congress.
We are so completely focused on our political time, our official time, on making sure that we win and prepare for the lame duck, whether it's debt ceiling or whether it's other legislation that is necessary for the people.
Some Republicans in the House and Senate say new leadership is needed. About a dozen GOP senators say that they want to delay leadership elections, which are going to be held on Wednesday. Members of the House Freedom Caucus say that they are threatening to withhold support for Leader McCarthy if their demands are not met. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
A lot is on the table and a big question for bishops across the United States. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops meets in Baltimore this week with an agenda that includes prayer, dialogue about Ukraine and the Eucharistic revival, and, of course, a vote for the new conference president and vice president. Joining us now with more from Baltimore is executive editor of EWTN News, Dr. Matthew Bunson. Dr. Bunson, great to be with you as always. A full week ahead for our bishops, that's for sure. Let's talk more about that and the top issues on the table this year.
Well, it's, as you mentioned, the big ticket item, so to speak, is the election of not just the president, but also the vice president for the conference. We have a normal pattern that the vice president tends to assume the role of president, but that's not possible this year because the vice president, Archbishop Alan Vigneron of Detroit, will be too old. He'll be over 75 in terms of his term. So we have two open spots and about 10 or so candidates all lining up as possible successors to Archbishop Jose Gomez of Los Angeles. On top of that, we also have the election of 6 new committee chairs, I believe including religious liberty. But then there are a host of other issues for our time, including the question of abortion and how the bishops are going to respond to the midterms, but also the post-Dobbs era. We're also looking, as you noted too, at the Eucharistic revival and some possible causes for canonization. So it's a very full agenda for the bishops here.
Yeah, indeed. Sounds like for sure. And as you mentioned, the Supreme Court's reversal on Roe last summer really sure to be a talking point. How do you see that decision affecting the bishop's approach to pro-life matters going forward?
Well, that's a really important question and one that they've been trying to address since the Dobbs decision back in June. The bishops are certainly cognizant of the fact that the pro-life movement suffered 5 defeats in different ballot measures and amendments in this most recent midterm. And they're pushing ahead with, I think, 2 things. The first is making sure that Catholics everywhere know clearly what Catholic teachings are on abortion. That, of course, is something that we have to reiterate, but also they want to stress again the preeminence of abortion as the issue of our time. But they're also looking, as they have since the overthrow of Roe v. Wade, looking at the pastoral care for children, but also for mothers. They're looking at the need for a culture that really does care for both. And that, I think, is something that we'll be hearing from Archbishop William Lori, Baltimore, who will be speaking to the bishops in the coming days. That stress, again, on pastoral care, but also that building a culture of life, really what they see are opportunities post-Roe, despite how some of the votes turned out the midterms.
And Matthew, I'm curious, do you expect the bishops to delve into hot-button political issues such as immigration? And if so, to what extent?
Well, I think one of the things that we can all circle in their discussions is going to be what they want to do with one of the key documents that they've issued over recent years, and that is forming consciences for faithful citizenship. The faithful citizenship document was a source of some controversy and real debate on the floor of the bishops' meeting several years ago. In this case, I think the question that's before them is what they want to do with it as we're heading now very swiftly into what will be a presidential campaign in just 2 years. Do they want a new document? Do they want to revise the one that they have? Do they want summaries of it to go out? I think we're going to hear quite a number of differing opinions on what they need to do with it. And and whether or not abortion, in the view of some bishops, should remain the preeminent issue, or should it be one of a number of issues. I expect a very lengthy debate among the bishops. We'll see if they accomplished any of that in their executive session. They were behind closed doors today. We'll know a lot more once they actually start talking about this.
Matthew, we probably have a little bit more than a minute left or so, but I'm curious, do you know who is expected to be the next president of the USCCB?
Well, trying to handicap any election is very difficult, especially one involving bishops. We hear a lot of different names as potentially strong candidates, but we also have to be very careful about predicting things. These can be very, very difficult to gauge, as I was saying. But one thing that we do need to take a moment to address, and that is the outgoing president of the conference, and that's Archbishop Jose Gomez, whose tenure has been marked by political rancor in the country, real division and polarization. But he has worked over his time as president here to build a consensus. We saw that in the controversy surrounding the bishop's Eucharistic documents just last year. And the way that the Archbishop, as president of the conference, really worked to build a consensus among his brother bishops in how they should address the question of Eucharistic coherence, Eucharistic consistency, especially for politicians. It has been a remarkable term for Archbishop Gomez, and I really think we need to thank him for the work that he's put in under very difficult circumstances, even among some of his brother bishops.
Absolutely, indeed. And it sounds like it's going to be a very busy and very interesting week ahead. Thank you so much, Dr. Bunson. Always appreciate it. And we have a lot more still to come here on EWTN News Nightly, including the struggle with gender confusion, how finding God helped one man find himself, and the latest on a deadly bombing in Istanbul. Thanks for staying with us. He calls himself a voice and a role model for any teen struggling with gender confusion. British-born Ollie London's battle with the disorder led him to seek plastic surgery procedures 32 times. A series of choices he says were fueled by his own distorted body image and social media. I spoke with Ollie last week to hear about his journey to the truth about himself. If you don't mind, can you take us back to the beginning of your story, before that first surgery? I know you were 13 and you were going through some hard times. Tell us about that.
So my story really started as a teenager. When I used to go to school, I used to get bullied so much every single day by the way I looked. I had a very big nose. I had a lot of acne on my skin. So I was very, very self-conscious, and people would tease me, you know, call me Big Nose. They would call me a monster or Shrek. So that really kind of stuck in my head and made me feel so bad about my appearance. So that's when I started to kind of think that maybe I can change myself. You know, I'm really unhappy in my body and with my face. Can I change that? And then my next start of the journey was in Korea in 2013 when I underwent my first plastic surgery, and then it kind of became a snowball effect, and I kind of started having so many surgeries to try and change, you know. And then 6 months ago I had facial feminization surgery. I tried to look more feminine. I thought maybe I've got, you know, gender dysphoria. Maybe I feel like I'm trapped in the wrong body. And yeah, so I've had 32 surgeries now, and I've got to a stage now where I kind of regret what I've done to myself. I kind of feel, you know, why did I go on this journey? I was very lost, and finally the last few months I've actually found God. I've been going to church, and that has really made me rethink and reevaluate my life and what's important to me.
Yeah, and I want to ask you, Ollie, were there any other maybe outside influences that caused you to think, I should go through these surgeries? I don't like the way I look. What about social media? Did that play into it?
I think for any young person, myself included, there is so much pressure these days with television, with magazine. The beauty standards are always so high, especially with social media. And what young people don't seem to realize is that every celebrity, from the Kardashians to, you know, Paris Hilton, we all use Photoshop. Everybody uses Photoshop. You get to see an idealized version of a person's life, which is not necessarily true. So, I think I definitely felt that pressure. I saw when I was living in Korea, I saw all these K-pop posters, all these TV shows with K-pop stars, and they looked absolutely amazing. So that's really why I thought maybe I can have surgery to look like a K-pop star. Maybe I can look more beautiful. And I think a lot of young people these days are undergoing surgeries. They're also getting confused with their genders based on what they're seeing on TikTok, on Instagram. And I think it's very harmful to a young child's development.
Absolutely. What would you say to parents who have young children, maybe in adolescence, and are struggling right now?
So I would say to parents, I know it's really hard because kids these days, they're obsessed with using a phone. A lot of kids use phones from when they're like 4 years old. And I don't think it's healthy for a child to be on their phone all the time. I think the parents definitely need to have more involvement on what the child is doing. Maybe limiting their access to social media platforms like TikTok or Instagram until they're of a certain age where they've matured. Because I think, when you're 10 years old, 11 years old, you go onto TikTok, you see an influencer that is pushing these ideas on you. For instance, you have Dylan Mulvaney, who just met Joe Biden last week, and they are pushing these ideas onto kids which are not in the best interest of the child. The child may see this and think, okay, this is normal, I can do this. So then children will start to question their gender, they'll start to question their identity, and they will try, and say to a teacher or doctor, I'm in the wrong body, I need to have surgery, I need to have puberty blockers from the age of 12. So I think social media is very harmful. So I would just say to parents, just be careful, keep an eye on your kids. There's a lot of harm on social media. Kids shouldn't really be on social media until they're, a developed teen. I know it's a struggle for parents because, kids are addicted to their phones, but just keep an eye on them because, you don't want your kids to change into something that's not right for them.
I know that you're also, closely following the push for transgender rights in schools here in the United States, and you also have a message for the school boards here. Tell us what that is.
So I would just say to the school boards, stop pushing these radical gender ideologies on children. In kindergartens, in some school boards, they are teaching children about sexual education, about gender identity, telling kids to be non-binary. It's really wrong. These are just children, and, children are so impressionable. If a person of authority, like a teacher, tells something to a child, the child automatically believes it. They trust this person. So when a teacher is telling a child it's okay to change your gender and you're 10 years old, it's okay to go on puberty blockers at 12, the child will believe this. They'll go home to their parents, they'll tell the parents, and I think, some of the people controlling the education system have these woke ideologies that they think it's acceptable to do this to children. But, in my view, it's child abuse because children shouldn't be subjected to anything like this. They should just be getting an education, playing sports, learning history, doing things that are important to a child's development, not changing their pronouns, not having gender-neutral toilets, which can cause harm, as we saw in Virginia, where there was a 15-year-old boy in a skirt that used the female restroom and raped a young girl. This is not acceptable, but sadly these school boards are pushing this on young kids.
And in part two of our interview tomorrow, Ali tells us more about finding God and what happened when he walked into a church. Up next on EWTN News Nightly, power of perseverance. Pope Francis tells the faithful to focus on God even when the world is in distress. Plus, how the Holy Father marked a date to promote care for the poor. We are back tonight. Turkish police have arrested a Syrian woman in connection with a deadly bombing in Istanbul yesterday that killed 6 people and injured dozens.
Olay sonrası yapılan bir teknik.
Turkey's interior minister says the woman had connections with Kurdish militants. Meanwhile, mourners left red carnations at the popular tourist spot where the attack took place. Funerals were held today for the victims. Well, Iran is defending a rocket attack against a Kurdish region in northern Iraq as legitimate.
خودشون موفق نبودن و ملتزم نبودن.
An Iranian official accused the separatist groups of violating Iran's territorial sovereignty. A security official from one of the targeted Kurdish groups says there were casualties from the attack. but did not provide details. The Holy See has launched a preliminary probe into allegations of abuse against a church leader from France. Last week, Cardinal Jean-Pierre Richard acknowledged the inappropriate conduct from 3 decades ago. He is the former Archbishop of Bordeaux. Cardinal Richard also had investigated abuse allegations against clergy in France. Pope Francis reminds the faithful of the power of perseverance.
Con la vostra perseveranza salverete la vostra vita.
And his Sunday address to pilgrims at the Vatican, the Holy Father said that there will always be revolutions and unrest, and we are called to ignore the things of this world to focus instead on building goodness with everything around us. Pope Francis had lunch with the poor of Rome after presiding at a Mass on the World Day of the Poor. The Holy Father joined more than 1,000 guests who dine in the Paul VI Hall inside the Vatican. The meal was part of several Vatican-sponsored initiatives marking the 6th annual World Day of the Poor, including a free mobile medical clinic in St. Peter's Square. Joining us now from Rome is Andreas Tannhauser, EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief. Andreas, great to see you. We understand the Holy Father celebrated Mass for the World Day of Poor yesterday. What can you tell us about his homily? What did he say?
Well, Tracy, thousands of faithful flocked to St. Peter's Square for the Angelus, and many attended Mass in the Basilica commemorating the 6th World Day of the Poor. Pope Francis introduced this annual day in 2017, reminding the Church that they should not love with words, but with deeds. Also, this year, the Vatican let deeds follow words and offered free healthcare services, as well as food to the homeless, who were also special guests at the Holy Mass. In his homily, Pope Francis said that we should love the most abandoned of God's children because he loved us first. We should care for the poor, in whom we find Jesus, who became poor for our sake. The Pope continued. Archbishop Rino Fisichella, the pro-prefect for the section of evangelization at the Dicastery for Evangelization, assisted the Holy Father during Mass, and he was responsible for organizing this World Day of the Poor. I was able to speak with His Excellency today, asking what caring for the poor and evangelization had in common. And Archbishop Fisichella, of course, said that we're sent to all people, especially to the poor, to let them know about Jesus' love. At the same time, we're being evangelized by the poor. By looking to those who have little, we may understand the essentials of the gospel.
And Andreas, we know that today is also the first day of meetings in Rome for the German bishops. They'll be meeting with Pope Francis and church leadership among ongoing controversy about the German synodal path. What more do we know about those meetings?
Well, so Tracy, we know that there have been many pre-meetings in the Roman Curia, so the church leadership, to make sure that the German bishops are addressed with one voice. It is the first visit of the whole German Bishops' Conference to Rome since 2015. And meanwhile, the controversial German synodal path had started. Bishops and church employees have started to discuss and vote in favor of changing church teachings, such as same-sex marriage, celibacy, and women's ordinations to the priesthood. Pope Francis has said twice so far that Germany does not need a second Protestant church and reminded the bishops to stay faithful to church teachings. So far, the path has continued with the bishops defending the process. During the last assembly of the German Synodal Path, more or less a month ago, some bishops vetoed a document urging the church to change the stance on marriage and sexuality. However, Bishop Betzing, who is the head of the Bishops' Conference, then said he would still bring this document to Rome and to the attention of the Pope. Now, we expect Pope Francis to remind the German bishops of their limits and the limits of the synodal path and repeat his warning from 2019 when the process began. And he said back then that the synodal way has no power to compel bishops or faithful to new forms of church government and doctrine. Other topics to be discussed will focus on several abuse reports that have come out over the last years and the steady decline of the number of Catholics in Germany.
And Andreas, before I let you go, on a different note, EWTN CEO and chairman of the board, Michael Warsaw, was in Rome last week. What was the purpose of his visit?
Yeah, that's right, Tracy. He was spending several days here in Rome, and he participated in a meeting organized by the Dicastery for Communications. He's been reappointed by Pope Francis as a consultor to the Dicastery and also met in this function with the Holy Father on Saturday. As you know, Tracy, here in Rome, we're working closely with the communication channels of the Holy See in order to broadcast and publicize the message of Pope Francis and of the Church to the whole world. So this was really great joy for us to see.
Andreas, thank you so much for that report. We appreciate it. Andreas Tannhauser, EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief. Thank you again. And we thank you for watching tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Tracy Sabol. Good night, and God bless.